Hey everybody, this is Michael Arria from Mondoweiss. I'm the US correspondent there. I am joined by no one this week. I'm alone. I'm usually joined by Adam Horowitz, but for the second podcast in a row, he's not here, so I'm doing it solo. There is a big story that I thought was worth jumping on for solo. Before I get to it, I wanted to quickly go through the usual housekeeping and say if you are a fan of this podcast or you find what we say interesting or relevant or want to hear more or read more, I would encourage you to check out our website at mondoweiss.net and sign up for our newsletters, one of which is called The Shift and has existed since, I believe, 2019 and covers a lot of the same issues that we talk about on this pod, whether it's how Israel is factoring into U.S. elections or spending by the Israel lobby, foreign policy issues, crackdowns on activism, which, has been a big topic, obviously, in recent weeks. I'd encourage everybody to sign up for The Shift and subscribe to it. It comes out every Thursday, so there'll be a new issue out tomorrow, which will actually kind of cover much of what we talk about today in some different ways and in some similar ways. But now getting to the major topic, or the topic I wanted to talk about today, and that is, you may have already guessed, well, I guess you wouldn't have to guess because by the time this goes up, it'll be titled. But I wanted to talk about the Democratic primary, the Senate primary, next week in Michigan, between Representative Haley Stevens, who's been in the House for a while, is now vying for a Senate seat in Michigan, and Dr. Abdul El-Sayed, who is a former public health official and very progressive when it comes to domestic policy, also progressive when it comes to foreign policy, refers to what Israel has done in Gaza as a genocide, calls for an end to military assistance to Israel, highlights Palestinian human rights. And this is in contrast to Haley Stevens, who is backed, very pro-Israel. In fact, people may have seen this clip. Maybe we can add it to the video, but declared once that she sees Israel in her dreams. Israel comes to her in her dreams. And she certainly votes like that is true. She supports pretty much every pro-Israel piece of legislation. She supports continuing military assistance to Israel throughout the genocide and has up to the current moment. And because she has been such a stalwart supporter of the country and the Zionist cause, she is backed very heavily by AIPAC. And they have spent, as far as we know so far, they've spent about $30 million. That's according to the most recent numbers that I'm looking at. Although during the debate, the moderator in their most recent debate had referred to the fact that they've actually spent $46 million. I don't know if that was they were counting her previous House races, but as it stands currently, the number I'm looking at is $30 million. Although oftentimes in these races, after the race takes place, it's revealed that AIPAC actually spent a lot more. That is, even with the 30 million number, this is the biggest investment that AIPAC has ever made on a single race. And like I said, there's a reason why they're spending all this money. Not only do they risk another critic of Israel and another supporter of Palestine potentially going to Congress and further strengthening and growing the developing left flank within the Democratic Party, but they would also lose Stevens as a consistent pro-Israel vote in Congress. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about what this means for AIPAC, this specific election, because I think it goes beyond Stevens. And I think we have to contextualize it. This race is obviously coming in the wake of other Democratic primary wins for Israel critics. Many races where we've seen, political groups like DSA, left-wing groups exert their influence, and kind of a burgeoning insurgent movement within the Democratic Party. We've seen, obviously, Israel critics win in Pennsylvania and New York and Colorado in recent weeks. And now we have this election in Michigan. We also have the election in Missouri, where Cori Bush is trying to take back her seat in the first district in that state. She was ousted in 2024, as you probably know, by Wesley Bell with the help of $9 million from AIPAC. So that's another big race for them. But I really think the Michigan one, because they're spending so much money and because there's been so much focus on it, could serve as a referendum for their power and influence going forward. And I think this is the way that many people have viewed it and understandably framed it. I think, there was a headline that I just saw at the Associated Press that said this was referred to it as the biggest test of AIPAC's influence yet. I think not just because of the amount of money they're spending in this race, but also that wider context that I just alluded to. This election is happening just a few weeks after, or a couple weeks after, that big vote in the House where Thomas Massey introduced an amendment to the NDAA, which would have eliminated the $3.3 billion that Israel receives from the United States every year in military assistance. Massey ended up being actually the only Republican to back his own bill. But it was backed by 103 Democrats, kind of an unprecedented amount of Democrats when it comes to something like that. And many longtime supporters of Israel backed that bill and were kind of upfront about why they did. Someone like Nancy Pelosi, who no one would mistake as a Palestine supporter, voted for the Massey Amendment, for instance. She said, the United States must be a force for security and stability. The American people are rightly demanding an end to a perpetual cycle of war, and the Netanyahu government cannot maintain its current course. Therefore, while this amendment is ill-conceived, I vote yes for the message that it sends. So in the response to that vote, I think we obviously saw many pro-Israel Democrats attempt to voice some level of opposition to Netanyahu. They know it is a political win, or I should say, it's a political liability to side with Netanyahu at this point. And I think many politicians who rely on pro-Israel dollars, rely on money from the Israel lobby, are trying to thread a very difficult needle at the moment. But additionally, beyond the Pelosi's of the world, there was undeniably a certain level of fallout that AIPAC has had to deal with. As soon as this vote happened, AIPAC cut off contributions on its online portal for Democrats who supported the legislation. But to my mind, it's kind of hard to believe that that move will actually hurt the lawmakers. I think the writing on the wall, the direction of the wind, however you want to phrase it, suggests that any association with AIPAC is actually a liability for most Democrats. So it's not surprising that someone like Pat Ryan, as a representative in New York, after he voted for the Massey Amendment, declared that not only would he stop taking money from AIPAC, but that he was going to return all the money that he'd already gotten from AIPAC. This is him tweeting. Ryan said, I expect groups like AIPAC will not support me in my future elections, and frankly, I don't want their support. Hardline stances that refuse to stand up to a corrupt and increasingly dangerous Netanyahu regime have no place in our politics. Now, Pat Ryan is not a political genius. He simply, this is just very obvious to anyone who looks at the issue for more than 10 seconds. I mean, look at any poll that we've seen over the last year or two, particularly in the wake of the genocide. Today, let's just use Pew Research Center from earlier this year. This is from April. According to that survey, 80% of Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents have an unfavorable view of Israel. That is up from 69% last year, 2025, and in 2024, that number was 53%. So in just 4 years, 2022 to now, it's jumped from 53% of Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents having a negative view of Israel. Now it's 80%. 2022 is an interesting year when we have this discussion about AIPAC, because 2022 is the year that AIPAC launched UDP, the United Democracy Project, which is the group's super PAC. The idea there was that AIPAC was recalibrating the way it did business, or the way that it intervened in U.S. elections. Up to that point, Israel had often stated, although I'd say this was untrue, if at the very least debatable, that it hadn't directly spent in elections, or that it hadn't directly backed candidates. That was all out the window after they launched the super PAC. They already had the AIPAC not a super PAC, but the AIPAC PAC, so the Political Action Committee. But they knew that they couldn't use something called AIPAC or something with Israel in its title when they were spending money in Democratic races. Because even in 2022, before the genocide began, the polling already suggested that things were changing among Democratic voters. A deepening sympathy for Palestine, a deepening skepticism towards Israel. We had seen the election just a few years before of people like Rashida Tlaib, people like Ilhan Omar. So this was a growing sentiment, and this was obviously, I think, the creation of the UDP, AIPAC, Super PAC, was obviously driven in some capacity by a growing sense of anxiety. I don't want to overstate the negatives for AIPAC. They obviously exert a lot of influence, a lot of power. Any group that can show up in a state and spend millions of dollars is a force that needs to be reckoned with. I don't mean to diminish their influence in any way or suggest that they don't have a firm grip on our political process in many ways. They've obviously had major wins over the last 4 or 5 years. I mean, they were able to oust Palestine supporters in the House, people like Cori Bush, who, as I said, is trying to take back her seat. And, they were also able to oust Jamal Bowman in New York. And in both those cases, were able to insert pro-Israel lawmakers into Congress who, consistently back bills that are pro-Israel and consistently oppose any bill that questions or threatens the U.S.-Israel relationship. But obviously, a lot has changed since 2022, as I said, as I just identified those numbers, and things have completely flipped in terms of AIPAC's, not like they ever had some great reputation among Democratic voters, but I certainly think there's a deeper awareness of what they do, certainly, through reporting. We see more and more reporting of what they do. We see more and more just the mainstream media engaging with it. I mean, think of how many moments we've seen, even in terms of people like Josh Shapiro, people like Gavin Newsom, people who have these presidential aspirations. They got on mainstream shows now, radio shows, television shows, or podcasts. They're asked about support from AIPAC. These are questions that candidates didn't have to field not that long ago, just a few years ago. I don't think you saw those type of questions. I think there's a deeper awareness of what AIPAC does. I also think there's a deeper awareness of how they spend this money. We know that they can't spend the money directly. We know that they can't not that they can't spend the money directly, but they can't directly address the reason why they're backing these candidates. So they're voting for Stevens because she's a consistent vote. She didn't join the rest of the Democrats when it came to that Thomas Massey vote. She voted against it. They know that she's going to vote in support of Israel no matter what. They can't say that in their ads. So the ads that they're bankrolling in Michigan highlight Haley Stevens' connection to the manufacturing industry in the state. They highlight Haley Stevens' connection to the auto industry. They very heavily imply incorrectly that Barack Obama has endorsed Haley Stevens. This is the kind of stuff that they're paying for and running. They're not addressing the actual issue, which is Israel. So I think that this race really comes at an interesting time when we talk about AIPAC's long-term political future. And again, I don't mean to say that AIPAC's on the verge of disappearing or going anywhere, or they're going to stop spending lots and lots of money in U.S. races and primaries across the country. But I do think there is some deeper questions developing about their political project. I just wanted to read. I thought this was very interesting in Hart's from. I believe this is a few days ago. This is a political analyst from Michigan who spoke to Hartz, who said, speaking about the Senate race in Michigan, says, "I've never seen one single issue external to candidates' platform and campaign become so central. Even voters unfamiliar with El-Sayed came to see rejecting AIPAC as proof that he was clean." So what we're seeing here, in the words of this political analyst, is that AIPAC has quite obviously emerged as a political liability. People see genocide and apartheid as a litmus test when they head to the polls. There's no deep kind of mystery there. That shouldn't be surprising to anyone. Everyone has seen, this genocide kind of live streamed on their phones in recent years. It's natural that people would develop a deeper skepticism of Israel because of that. But it's also natural that people would hold lawmakers, incumbents, and challengers to a certain standard when it comes to that genocide. And it's logical that they would determine that if someone supports genocide or wants to continue to send a country weapons who is committing genocide, then that lawmaker or challenger cannot possibly be trusted when it comes to other issues, whether it's Medicare for all or the Grand New Deal, or pick pretty much any issue. If genocide is not a red line for you, then what is a red line? I think voters are rightly asking that question. The polling indicates that they're asking that question. It's a major issue for AIPAC going forward because their cause has become a real detriment. We've seen Haley Stevens have to fend off questions about this. And just to go back to the debate for a second, I was really struck by the fact, I would encourage people to check out the debate, which happened this past Tuesday, I believe, possibly Monday. I don't even know when this is going up, so I won't reference days. But the most recent debate between the two candidates, Haley Stevens was questioned by the moderator, who was of a Fox News affiliate, which I thought was at least a little bit surprising, about the amount of money that she's gotten from AIPAC and whether she thought that money would prompt her to do the organization's bidding if she was elected. She denied it. She said absolutely not. But one has to ask, why would AIPAC be spending $30 million on a race, possibly more, if it didn't think it could enact, or it didn't think it has some level of influence over Haley Stevens and how she votes? Why would it be spending any money at all? Why would it be spending $1 million, let alone $30 million, unless it knew which way Haley Stevens was going to vote, and that, they know certainly that she's going to support Israel in Congress, whether it's in the House or whether it's the Senate. So I think that, if Stevens loses, this is obviously a major setback for the Israel lobby for a variety of reasons. First of all, they have potentially, we don't know what's going to happen in the general election, but they might end up with another Israel critic in Congress. They lose Stevens as a consistent vote. But like I said, I think it also shows that their deeper political project, this idea of showing up district by district and just dumping millions and millions of dollars and hoping that pro-Israel candidates win, it suggests it's not a sustainable strategy as the political winds continue to blow a different direction as we continue to see this deepening shift. So I think that's all important information to keep in mind going into next Tuesday's race. I do think it on some level will be a referendum on AIPAC's influence and power. And I think we also have the big race in Missouri, where once again, AIPAC has become a major debating point factor in the rematch between Cori Bush and Wesley Bell. So I will be back next week with Adam to talk about the results of these races and talk about what's next for AIPAC going forward. But I certainly think that this will set the table, so to speak, or show us some level of momentum in either direction as we kind of move into the midterms. I think it will really show us maybe what to expect when it comes to the Israel lobby on that wider level, especially as, the war in Iran continues and we continue to see horrific images out of, the West Bank, whether it's settler violence or what's going on in Lebanon. And Israel, I think, predictably continues to plummet amid its reputation continues to plummet amid the U.S. population. So I'll be back next week to talk about the results of these elections. And thanks again for tuning in.